The Magineer. Book 0. Denial. Written by Abdullah Ali. Kinetic Audiobook produced by No Fun Publications. Chapter 1. The commander looked on at the plains in the distance. His eyes struggled to open against the howling winds of the raging, magical storm. From this height, he watched the errant tornado, made of devouring flames, as it obliterated the small village. What a waste, he seethed. Feeling a hand on his shoulder, he turned, only to find the cause of this indiscriminate slaughter staring him in the face. "What do you want?" His tone towards her was frosty. The Imperial Pyramid saluted.
"Oh, come on, Commander, you know it had to be done. We have our orders, and they come from the Magisterium and the Emperor himself."
Talius felt an overwhelming urge to bash his fist into something, or someone. Instead he refrained, whispering, there were civilians down there. Families, children. His voice was barely discernible against the howling wind.
"And they are the enemy. Given a chance, the savages would have risen in arms against us and stabbed us in the back."
She pointed to the south.
"You know it's the only way we can advance our supply lines, and we can't afford to enslave them on this tight schedule."
"I hate this damn world." Talius turned to observe the village once more. She shrugged.
"There will be peace someday."
He snorted. "You mean when the Empire controls everything and everyone, and there's nothing left to conquer?" Talius looked back with disdainful eyes. "You really think that's ever going to happen? From any other man? This talk could be considered high treason, and perhaps be the grounds for a slow and excruciating execution at the hands of the Empire's elite secret service." From the seasoned commander, however, it was simply an outburst. Nobody in their unit would report such a thing. She certainly wouldn't. The commander, and even worse, the hands, terrified her beyond measure. Feeling uncomfortable with the topic, she made an attempt to change it.
"Let's go back into the tent. It's going to get cold soon."
Talius was having none of it. "I think you should go. I'll stay here a while longer." His tone harbored no warmth. She shrugged her shoulders and withdrew. She knew how terrible his mood could swing and decided not to tempt fate. Backing away, she heard a shout leave him. "I hate this damn world." Ethan West currently sat within his lab. While his field of study was applied quantum physics, a field which had appeared not too long ago, he strongly disliked pure theory, instead enjoying getting his hands dirty. So, he was also an excellent mechatronics engineer and computer programmer. With help from his cerebral implants, he had managed to study multiple fields of science, like many of his peers had. The implants granted one eidetic memory, and could hold hundreds of years' worth of knowledge. Many scientists naturally used them to further their research. The implants weren't sentient, but they were pretty close. The artificial intelligence that operated them was state-of-the-art, and worked as an extension of his nervous system and cerebral cortex. The research project he currently worked on involved three things: a quantum computer, a projected field generator, and a mechanical arm. What he was trying to do, in actuality, was considered madness by his peers, though he didn't share their predominant opinions, completely disagreeing with their sentiment. He believed that his experiment was completely feasible. What the experiment entailed was a simple objective. His attempts were to pull objects from a parallel dimension through the field. A little orange ball was the object in question. It was positioned on one side of the field, while the robotic arm was situated on the opposite end. Any dimension with enough similarity to his own would suffice. For instance, if the robotic arm extended into the field and grabbed a green cube, it would mean that in a reality similar to his own, an alternate version of himself had chosen to experiment with a green cube instead of an orange ball. However, the experiment proved to be quite a challenge, as the projected field failed to consistently manage to project a portal to another reality. The single time it did, the automated failsafe measures had to immediately abort due to decompression. It had opened a portal to some point in outer space. Ethan wouldn't accept defeat that easily, though. The field projector was connected to the quantum computer, and would simply project a field with the parameters supplied through the data connection. Said parameters were constantly changing as the quantum computer evaluated simulation after simulation of parallel realities. After sitting unoccupied for hours on end as he waited for something to happen, he resorted to playing a game. It was a state-of-the-art prototype quantum role-playing game, where the game's engine didn't use a pseudo or random number generator but an algorithm which was capable of true randomness. This was another advancement to science coming with the advent of the quantum computing revolution. The computer could pick a true random state, and the game's universe reflected that in every way possible. His mind wandered as he contemplated this. It was stunning how the entire game universe resembled real life. It was a shame he had to run it on a lower graphical quality setting, since it was sharing the CPU time of the simulation. He knew he wasn't supposed to do this, but it was so mind-numbingly boring. It wasn't slowing the simulation by much anyway, he reassured himself. A quantum computer could simulate all possible states simultaneously, so it was no problem. His focus dimmed as his thoughts returned to the stimulation. Calling it quits, he saved the game. He was close, he felt it in his bones. Just a bit more time and he pressed the save game button absent-mindedly. Just a bit more, that was his last thought before three things happened at once. An error message appeared, a new portal opened, and the lab imploded around him. Commander Talius currently rode alongside his unit to join the main host of the Imperial Army near the front lines at the Crashy Plains to the north. He was still brooding about the civilians they'd had to kill along the way. He knew there was no other choice. Their tribal nature would have eventually caused them to rebel if the Empire decided to enslave them without specialized slavers around to take care of their training. However, he could still not stomach the act so quickly and easily. It was simple, there was no route they could take to end this conquest peacefully. The Empire was determined and the Krell were proud foes. He fought against thinking of the massacres yet to come when Alim, the Imperial Pyromancer, sidled up to him on her mount.
Commander Talius, I wanted you to know that I'm sorry about earlier. I don't enjoy slaughter.
She apologized, meekly. Don't apologize. We're all following orders. Shocked at his response, her eyes widened in disbelief. He raised an eyebrow, asking, "What, did you think I'd disobey orders?"
No, of course not. I'm just surprised you're taking it so well. After your outburst, You looked very upset back there.
Don't worry about it. His reply was curt, stiff.
How long before we arrive?
She questioned, after a bout of silence. His eyes shifted to the setting sun. Tomorrow morning, we'll join the battle, and the
Warning, multiple unknown temporal and spatial shifts detected. Host status is undetermined. Minor injuries to host body detected. Radiation detected. Unknown subatomic particles detected. Unknown data interface detected.
The first thing he heard when he came to consciousness was this. The implant's air was warning Ethan about something or many things, but where to begin? He attempted lifting his eyelids but felt utterly dizzy and extremely nauseous. Deciding to lay down with his back on the ground, his eyes finally opened against the harsh glare of the sun. Wait, the sun. Wasn't he in his lab? He tried to focus. After flailing around a couple of times, he sat up slowly and looked around, his heartbeat accelerating with each second. Smack dab in the middle of vast plains, two opposing war camps with pitched tents were to the north and south of him. Two massive armies stood at opposing ends in orderly lines and were at a standoff. It seemed as though they were preparing to battle just when he appeared. Out of nowhere, he jumped to his feet. One of the armies was not even human. Were those gigantic horned people? At that moment, Chapter 2. Commander Talius was stunned. There they were, about to engage in battle with the enemy when, with a loud bang, a strange human, dressed in odd clothing, appeared out of nowhere on the battlefield. It must have been a teleportation spell, he muttered under his breath. Aelin squeaked from behind him.
That was no spell.
How would you know? He asked, not looking at her.
Teleportation magic is impossible. It's the stuff of myth and legends. Besides, I detected no spell fluctuations in the ambient manosphere.
Fluctuations? His curiosity was piqued.
Yes, any spell casting must cause some fluctuation in the manosphere, no matter how minute the effect. It's like how you can't tread water without creating ripples. It's the principles of causality we all studied at the academy.
The strange human now sat up, casting anxious glances around, a look of bewilderment evident on his face. That makes him even more curious. Do you think he's with the enemy? He asked.
I think.
Her response was interrupted by the sound of a piercing horn. It looks like the general thinks this is a plot by the enemy and is rushing to attack, he thought, annoyed. Looking at the men surrounding him, he lifted a fist in the air.
To glory! Charge!
He shouted over the din. Two armies charged at each other across the vast battlefield. Ethan still stood in the middle, clueless on what to do. Should he run east or west? Should he hunker down and hope nobody on either side tries to kill him? He was so gripped by indecision that he started panicking, and that's when the eye kicked in.
Warning, host is experiencing third-degree panic attack, administering beta blockers.
Easy now. Breathe, he told himself. After a few beats, his heart rate steadied, and his mind was calm once again. Think, how do I get myself out of this situation? He asked himself, watching both armies charge from opposite ends of the plains. He looked at the human side of the conflict and believed he had better chances at surviving amongst his own kind. Although the human host was smaller by a large margin, he held on to hope that they wouldn't attack him on principle. So, that's where he decided to go. Activate the survival protocol, calculate the most optimal route through the charging human army, and execute, he thought to the AM plants. The survival protocol was a built-in feature reserved for emergencies only. It was a method by which the AM plants would calculate and project the safest path from point A to point B through highly dangerous environments. They were also tasked to control the adrenal glands to fine-tune the cardiovascular system, all whilst pushing the muscles to the maximum to avoid any dangers and maneuver the body to the destination. His destination currently lay behind the charging human army, to the north, further away from the Horde people as possible.
Active simulation in progress. Activating survival protocol.
He felt his body lurch as his control released. He lost control of every muscle in his body. The AI used all the sensory information it could collect to supplement its data on the situation. Every move it made was a measured effort. Every twitch of his eyes was calculated. He stood frozen in place for 10 seconds while it collected the data. 10 seconds which felt like an eternity.
Warning, unknown energy signature detected. Altering simulation to account for new data.
At that moment his body jumped backwards with superhuman reflexes, and shortly after, the first fireball landed nearby.
A fireball? For real? Did someone just cast a goddamn spell at my face?
He was overcome with an urge to scream. There was less than 10 meters between both sides of the conflict, with Ethan located smack dab in the middle when the AI finished its calculations.
Data analysis complete. Requesting confirmation.
Confirm, damn it! Confirm!
He shouted.
Survival protocol initiated.
Then, it began. Did you see that? By the gods. How is he moving like that? All eyes were fixated on Ethan as he traversed the now bloodied plains, jumping over boulders and combatants alike. He evaded spells, arrows, and strikes from melee weapons with unprecedented grace. Is it magic? His body twisted in midair as 3 arrows tried to find their way into his shoulder and abdomen. They all missed, with one of them wedging itself in a human warrior fighting to the side. It's a demon. Kill it. A horned soldier tried to jab him with a spear. Ethan's response was to step onto the shaft and direct his other leg into the face of his would-be attacker. A resounding crack was heard.
No. You idiots, stop trying to kill him. The general wants him alive.
One of the burly horned people bellowed. Ethan's progress was accelerating, now firmly behind the human ranks. Too bad they were trying to kill him now. As soon as they heard the horned man say they wanted him alive, they began gunning for his blood. Their chance at intercepting him was slim, however. He kept retreating along the lines of the human army. Bewildered looks followed him everywhere he went. He suddenly landed in an empty circular space, surrounded by human warriors from every direction. Everybody paused. Apparently the AI had judged him exhausted. Rightly so, and had decided that this was a safe spot to let him recuperate. He could see in his HUD, an overlay that came up in his vision whenever important things were happening, that it had analyzed the situation and judged their reaction as well.
Who the hell are you?
A towering human questioned. Just a traveler, he was wheezing.
Do not lie. Scum. Are you a Polarius spy?
No, I'm just lost. I swear it. Ethan was really too out of breath for this conversation.
We have all seen you materialize out of thin air. You're no traveler. You're a mage of sorts.
A what? No. I'm no mage. Ethan lifted his palms in supplication.
Then what are you?
The man was circling him now. I'm a scientist, Ethan tried to say. The warrior scowled fiercely.
A scientist? Do you take me for a fool? I've never heard of such a class.
Class.
You don't have classes where you come from.
The man was skeptical now. A grim realization dawned on Ethan at that moment. He looked at the leftmost corner of his vision. A flashing prompt laid there, forgotten in the heat of the situation.
Unknown data interface available. Would you like to connect?
Yes, he thought as he focused on the prompt. A flurry of messages appeared in his vision. It resembled a combat log from a role-playing game. There were messages about stat increases, elemental resistances, and experience gained. Holy shit, he exclaimed. The man looked at him quizzically. Wait, I'm in a fucking video game. Hysterical laughs left him at the realization. The surrounding men looked at him nervously. In their eyes, he clearly lacked the makings of a sane man.
Are you mad?
The big warrior's eyes held scorn. No, it's just, you wouldn't believe me even if I told you. His laughter was uncontrollable.
I tire of your games. Boy, you appear on our battlefield with the Polary. Cause a great ruckus and sow confusion. Now you law at us too.
No. Wait, seriously. Wait. Ethan tried to control himself. Okay, he inhaled deeply, collecting himself. Okay. First, what's your name? Ethan asked. The warrior's reply was instant.
Clothar. What is yours, boy?
All warriors had their eyes narrowed on Ethan in expectation. My name is Ethan West, and I come from another world. Commander Talius surveyed the now desolate battlefield. The strange man had disappeared in the sea of Crow tribes extending to the north. He'd managed to convince General Grimman to resign the order to kill that human and instead try and capture him alive. The opportunity was now lost. Damn stubborn humans, he muttered. His relationship with the Crow was somewhat complex. While he had to fight them day after day for the past 3 years, he had grown to respect their unyielding pride. Even in captivity, it was rare to see a Crow slave completely broken. Even their non-combatants were fiercely resistant to enslavement. This was unlike the countless nations and races that the Empire brought to heel over the past 300 years. However, something about that strange human resonated within him. The way he dodged and weaved through the battlefield was simply unreal. So, do you think he was with the enemy after all? His question was directed at Aelin the Pyromancer.
Not necessarily. Maybe he panicked and found them less threatening.
She tried to reason. I'll admit that the visage of a Polari army in battle armor does not inspire courage in anyone but a Krell, he conceded. A sigh left her.
They've bloodied us badly, haven't they?
As to be expected from proud people cornered like this, yes. Talius seemed resigned to the losses.
At least many have been captured.
For all the good that will do us. You know Krell aren't good slaves, they're too proud. There's no benefit from this pointless war.
They'll probably go to the Royal Arena. The games this year will be excellent.
She persisted, remaining somewhat optimistic. The Royal Arena was the greatest source of entertainment in the Empire, seated at the heart of it, the capital city of Geovac. It was only second to the Imperial Palace in its splendor, and it could hold more than 80,000 spectators at a time. Commander Talius couldn't be bothered less by the entertainment of royalty, though he saw no benefit from the cruel practice. Gladiators were destined to suffer and die. It was slow torture. At least a regular slave was a productive member of society, and a rehabilitated prisoner had hopes for a future. We shall see, he responded as he turned away dismissively.
Wait.
She hurried after him. He turned, meeting her gaze. What? Her voice was low, meek.
I want your permission to perform a divination.
A divination for what? Confusion laced his tone. Divinations, a branch of magic, were responsible for predicting the future, locating objects, or missing people. It required a trace of what you were trying to locate.
That mystery human, I think, is important.
She voiced, lowering her eyes. He knew that deep down she wanted that human all along, and badly. She may look innocent, but under that demure demeanor she was an entirely different person. He wouldn't be fooled by her even for a second. She would dissect that human piece by piece until she figured out all his secrets. Where he came from, and why he appeared in the middle of the battlefield at such an opportune moment. While he also held a desire to interrogate that human. He wouldn't wish that fate on anyone. But now that she had set her eyes on him, nothing would stop her. A few beats passed before he spoke. Magus Aelin, I think you're giving the matter too much weight. He's just another human.
But...
No buts. We can't waste precious resources for large-scale spells such as a divination on a single human, no matter what you think. He may have even been captured with the rest of the Krell all along. He silenced her with his decisive words. Is that understood? He asked firmly.
Yes, sir.
Dismissed. He doubted this would dissuade her and knew for sure he hadn't heard the last of it. Chapter 3. Move it, mincemeat. The butt of a spear poked Ethan in the back. Hey, there's no need for that. Ethan protested.
Of course there is, you're slow.
The Krell tribesman pointed out. We've been climbing this mountain non-stop for the entire evening. When are we going to stop? Ethan complained.
Once the boss gives the word.
The man replied nonchalantly.
Shut it back there.
Kovar shouted from the front.
Yes, boss.
True to his word, the man shut up. They'd been climbing non-stop since dusk. After Ethan's revelation, Kovar had, for some reason, decided to withdraw from the battle with his small unit. Ethan had no idea what happened to the rest of the army, and they'd been hurting him at spur point ever since. He knew he could escape if he really wished to. He could activate the survival protocol yet again, but it would really harm him this time. The stress accumulating on his body from using it a second time in rapid succession would be a truly unpleasant experience. Besides, he had no idea where to go. Looking around, he could only see rocks and light shrubbery sprouting from some cracks in the landscape. Although, with his computer-enhanced vision, he did notice some motion in the vegetation every now and then. At first he thought they were animals, but then he noticed something else. Every time he noticed the motion, it was followed by a different bird call, and his party would sound another bird call in response. He assumed it was a predetermined pattern, used as a method for identification or some such, that allowed them to travel past ambushes on the mountainside. It was quite primitive, but effective nonetheless. Although his implants had managed to crack the pattern after a couple such encounters, he kept his mouth shut, not wishing to offend the locals. From what he was told about the Krell tribes, they were quite aggressive to strangers. But maybe that was because of the Horned people, the Polari, that were hunting them down everywhere. He did not know. He didn't have the full picture. He was hoping to fill that gap in his knowledge on the way up the mountain, but every time he tried to chat up the warriors, they either rebuked him, or Kovar put a stop to it. They clearly wanted him in the dark about everything. After he'd mentioned that he'd come from a different world, Kovar issued a few terse commands. Then the troop of soldiers surrounding him had closed ranks and escorted him away from the battlefield, then out of the plains, and now up the sharp inclines of this mountain. He only wished he knew where they were going. Maybe a camp of some sort. They walked in silence for some time as he reviewed the battle logs from earlier. Still unable to believe his eyes. You evade the fireball. Plus 6 XP. You evade the arrows. Plus 8 XP. You evade the fireball. Plus 9 XP. You evade the swipe of a bat'lix. Plus 2 XP. You evade the spear attack. Plus 3 XP. You kick the soldier in the face, breaking his jaw. Plus 8 XP. The soldier is stunned. The soldier faints. Plus 12 XP. The warrior attacks the soldier with a slash of his broadsword. The soldier dies. Plus 36 XP ASSIST. Congratulations, you are now a level 2 scientist. Congratulations, you are now a level 2 engineer. Feat of strength performed. Plus 2 STR. Plus 1 DIX. Plus 4 AGI. Analyze that combat log. See if you can glean anything from it. I want to know how this leveling system works. Come to think of it, what was that about the unknown data interface? He asked it.
Unknown, the foreign interface appeared to be latching to the visual and the auditory cortices directly by an unknown, non-physical means.
Why didn't it blind and deafen me the moment it invaded my brain then?
Emergency procedures took place and the direct interface was prevented from forming. It was put under quarantine. The synthetic neural pathways of the implants are acting as a filter and interpreter for all visual and auditory data coming through the foreign interface, which is completely isolated from the host brain tissue.
Good work. Keep it that way, and put that on the priority analysis list too. But wait, what audio am I receiving?
All communications with locals is automatically translated from their languages to the host's main language. Analysis suggests that the same is happening on their end.
So I've not been speaking the same language as them all this time. Holy shit. I'm actually inside a video game dimension. He wanted to pinch himself, but decided against it. No reason to make them doubt his sanity again. After all, the Krell, they looked a lot like textbook Native Americans, and their tribalism certainly deepened the impression. But they also tattooed their bodies heavily. Native Americans didn't do that, did they? Wait, they did during wars, right? AI, is this correct?
Assessment is correct. Would you like to watch an educational video on the subject?
Maybe later. I certainly need to investigate this in the future. Remind me to do so when I have a moment. Aylin Merza was currently in the magisterium part of the war camp. She had petitioned for an audience with the Vice Magister, and naturally her request, coming from a lowly pyromancer, was put on the waiting list. The Vice Magister was a busy personality and had many responsibilities, like polishing his golden behind, she thought disdainfully. But she wanted that divination, even if Commander Talius would not authorize it. She had to know where that man went. More importantly, she had to know where he came from. If only the commander would understand. But maybe, just maybe, he did understand her. She had her suspicions that he might have picked up on some of her more extracurricular activities. Her other fields of study were of the less known, and much less welcomed variety. She just didn't understand why things like soul-trapping magic and necromancy were so ubiquitously frowned upon. If she's going to torch an entire village anyway, why not capture all that spiritual power for herself while she's at it? Why not raise the skeletons to faithfully serve a righteous purpose? So what if thousands of immortal souls would suffer for eternity? It's not her problem once they're bound to the soul crystals. Or undead vessels, or both. A revenant. A girl can dream, right? It's not like they can harm anyone unbidden. Unless someone broke the crystals. Well, the undead went feral, of course. But she was careful. And would never slip and allow such a thing to happen, ever. She was currently waiting, sitting at a bench and sipping some spiced wine from a pitcher she had managed to liberate somewhere. And she kept reheating the wine goblet using a simple spell from the palms of her hands as she waited, and waited, and waited. Aelin wasn't going to give up no matter what. She wanted that divination. Commander Talius be damned. Knowledge. Her knowledge was more important. And finally, after a long wait, the Vice Magister sent for her. She got up hastily, produced a hand mirror, and redid her makeup. She donned her ornaments and jewelry in the right arrangements, a seductive symbol of the power of her noble heritage. From her delicate horns, and made sure she was stunning as always. She would get what she wanted, no matter what the price. Ethan's group had journeyed up the slopes of the mountain for 2 more days without stopping for anything other than food, sleep, and calls of nature. They fed him dried stringy meat that he dared not imagine from whence it came. The taste was strange to his palate, but not entirely unpleasant after a few bites. As they climbed higher, it got much, much colder, and when their waterskins dried up, they filled them with snow to melt using their body heat. They weren't entirely cruel, though. They did give him some furs to warm himself up, once they had made absolutely sure that he couldn't cast any fire magic. This is torture, the sadistic bastards. Ethan thought, not daring to actually voice this sentiment. Something in the group dynamic had shifted in those last few hours though. Everyone looked more wary, as if they were expecting an attack at any time. Something in the group dynamic had shifted in those last few hours though. Everyone looked more wary, as if they were expecting an attack at any time. Their formation tightened, they took fewer breaks, and they appeared more alert. This naturally made him very nervous. If such strong warriors could be unnerved by something, what would such a thing do to him, a newly dislocated civilian from a different land? He soon found out what had put them on edge when a gigantic bird the size of a building swooped down from the mountain peak and grabbed a man in its huge talons. Kotha was out there in an instant, drawing a bead with his longbow. He took aim and shouted,
Triple shot.
An arrow left the longbow, and ghostly images of 2 other arrows could be seen mirroring its path as it closed on the giant bird of prey. The 3 arrows pierced the poor man in the chest and the neck. He must have died quickly, for he stopped his struggles immediately. The bird continued flying away. What the hell was that? Ethan asked Kotha after the bird had disappeared.
That was a rock. They live high in the mountains. Have you not seen one before?
Kotha was very calm, despite almost having lost his head to a giant bird mere seconds ago. Did you just kill your own kinsman? Ethan's tone was icy cold.
Yes. He would have endured horrible torture in the beaks of the chicks, and begged for death long in coming. They would have kept him alive for days. So I spared him that fate.
Ethan looked away in shame, his anger dissipating. Now he understood. Suddenly his tiny problems paled in comparison to this simple fact of life. This was not a forgiving world. It was eat or be eaten. He was determined to remember that. When Aelin entered the Vice Magister's tent, she stood there in shock. Sitting there and laughing with the Vice Magister was none other than her very own secret nemesis, Commander Talius, and the look he gave her made her blood run cold. Oh hello, Lady Meza. Are you here to petition his radiance for a divination against my orders? He asked in a cool voice, as blunt and to the point as always. Aelin's mind was screaming at her to recover with something. Anything. To say, but nothing came to mind. She squirmed and prayed for the earth to swallow her whole at that very moment. I see, as expected. Talius looked at the Vice Magister. You see, your radiance. I win, he said, proffering an upturned palm to the man. Aelin looked up quizzically. His radiance made a bet. He said that you would never have the gall to go against my orders. Since any respectable student of the Magisterium would never go against a direct order from their superior. It looks like I won the bet. The Vice Magister handed him a sealed pouch of coins while staring daggers at Aelin. As he was leaving, he leaned in and whispered in her ear. It looks like you, young lady, are in deep shit. Moreover, once I made sure of your intentions, I took the time to tell him about your nightly activities. He brushed a tear from her cheeks. Good luck, kiddo. He smiled as he left. Late that night, she snuck out of the camp and started trekking north. With all her secrets made public, the only thing waiting for her at home was a trial. Her disgrace was so vile, she would no longer be welcome in the Empire. Even her family would disown her, once the news had traveled back to the capital. Her only choice was to die at the hands of these savages, and she was determined to take as many of them with her as she could. After 3 days of traveling through the mountains, Ethan's group finally reached their destination, which turned out to be the mouth of a small cave hidden behind a rocky outcropping. They were immediately surrounded the moment they approached the cave.
Cuther, I see you cowered and left the battle like the craven you are,
said a scrawny man wearing strange headgear. Ethan hated him immediately.
Telk, you have no business accusing me of being craven. I'm not the one hiding between my mother's bosoms,
replied Cuther coldly.
You will address me as Chieftain Tech, and unlike you I take my duties seriously. Guarding the matriarch of the Krell is but an honor.
Tech shot back with a venomous look.
And what business have you away from the battlefield, craven?
He asked with a sneer. His men laughed.
I'm here to petition the matriarch for an audience,
said Cuther with a nonchalant attitude.
Oh, you wish to ask for a boon, perhaps to finally be spared the rigors of honorable combat, and to settle down as a farmer. Is the life of a warrior too much for you?
Tech let out a loathsome laugh.
Move out of my way, Telk. I have important business with the matriarch.
Cuther tried to shoulder past, only to have his way barred by Tech's men.
I'm not letting you through until I know what business you claim to have,
he said as he eyed the group. His gaze finally settled on Ethan. Although he was completely wrapped in furs, he still looked noticeably foreign.
Aha. I see. And who would that hooter be? A spy, perhaps. Did you capture him? Is he the reason why you abandoned your sacred duty?
Ethan did not know what hooter meant, but he guessed it was not a nice word. This did not make him a happy guest, not in the least. Over the past few days, his eye had been slowly analyzing the language, with the help of the foreign interface that was translating for him. This would help him understand the language on his own, eventually. The reason he wanted to speak the language himself was that he didn't trust anything or anyone in this strange world. If the foreign interface that was so freely rendering aid to him were to suddenly disappear, he wanted to be able to survive on his own. What he didn't know, but his eye was in the process of analyzing, was that this foreign interface was as old as the universe he currently resided in. It was part of the system, something like the rules of physics or the universal constants governing its reality.
Our quest is none of your business. Chieftain Telk, now move aside.
Cuther's patience was obviously wearing thin.
Or what?
Tech tilted his head and looked directly at Cuther. It was clear this challenge could devolve into something with a violent outcome.
Or I will personally dole out punishment to errant children,
came the voice of an elderly woman from behind him. Tech's face paled, and he looked like a deer caught in headlights. He immediately jumped out of the way.
Elder Rowe, my most sincere apologies.
Tech backpedaled without shame.
That put him in his place.
Ethan heard the men behind him whisper.
Cuther, why have you come? Why have you not joined the ancestors with the warriors who perished at the front lines? Did you turn your back on your brothers?
We were defeated,
Cuther exclaimed in shock. The men behind him let out cries of dismay.
Yes, our shaman sent word with their last breath, and the ones who live have all retreated into the mountains. So pray tell, brave warriors, why do our foes still live while you are here, and not at the crashy plains fighting to the last man?
Cuther's look was grim as he reported.
We met this man on the battlefield.
He pointed back to Ethan.
His name is Ethan West. He appeared out of thin air, and moved like a cache of puzzles to evade pursuit. I have never seen anything like it. The Paleri wanted him alive, but he took shelter within our ranks and, based on something he told me, I made the decision that this was a matter for the great matriarch.
Fool, you didn't think him a Polari spy who seeks the matriarch's location. You dare bring him to the gathering?
Tech accused with disdain.
He did slay a Polari in battle. I saw it,
murmured a man from the back.
So what? This proves nothing.
They all started to argue loudly. Ethan was silent. He knew he only got the experience for assisting in that kill. But he didn't try to correct them. He was really nervous right now. What would he do if they decided to kill him right here? Run away? To where? Would he even be able to escape? And now that he knew the location of this gathering and that matriarch of theirs, could they really afford to let him go? Were they going to kill him after interrogating him for all the information he knew? His freedom wasn't really up for negotiation, but for now, he was willing to play along. Meanwhile, everyone was still arguing.
Silence,
Shouted the elder, glaring at Tech and the rest. They all quieted down. The elder, apparently deep in thought.
I see,
Said the elder, absent-mindedly kneading the colorful beads around her neck.
I see. Follow me.
Everyone began to follow her inside the cave, but she turned back and stopped them.
Not you, Tech. You and your men are still to guard this place.
Tech's face reddened, but he complied. With a look to his men, they turned and scattered to their posts. Elder Rowe turned to the other men accompanying Kova and Ethan.
All of you, go find a place to rest, and a meal to eat. Kova and Ethan, please follow me.
They both followed her into the heart of the gathering. Commander Talius was currently reviewing a scout's report of the battle's aftermath. He sat back in his seat and rubbed his bloodshot eyes. Damn it all. After their last stand on the plains, many groups of the enemy had escaped and retreated into the Crashy Mountains to the north. How troublesome. Now it would take months to completely root them out, if it was at all possible. This campaign's progress was basically destined to grind to a halt. Moreover, they would have the high ground and the free port of the city-state of Grania at their backs to resupply. The Empire couldn't move troops behind the mountains and surround them for this very reason. He'd cautioned his general against this in their last strategy meeting not more than 3 hours ago. As if this was not enough, there were other problems. Like the heavy losses at the battle for the plains. Each Imperial soldier was supposed to be worth 10 human warriors, according to Imperial propaganda, but in truth, in a fair fight, an experienced Krell warrior could hold his ground against as many as 3 regular Polari soldiers, while his general would have none of it. Talius knew this was just a basic truth. The only advantage the Empire could bring to bear against this enemy was its magisterium. There simply was no equal to the might of professionally trained battle mages and pyromancers that could cast large area effect spells and decimate swath of the opposition with the brute strength of the elements. But even then, the Krell had their shamans and their defensive magics. They could form power circles and link their spells, a technique which still eluded the magisterium. No shaman was ever captured alive, and for good reason. They would always self-destruct when cornered with no hope of escape. They were masters of this technique. He sighed and put down the report. There were movements along the Oru River. The river flowed from the Crashy mountain peaks and snaked its way south through the Crashy plains. It was a lifeline to the more desolate regions to the south closer to the border, and it looked like the Krell were planning to do something with it. He just didn't know what. But it would have to wait. Today he was being assigned a new subordinate after his pyromancer, Aelin, had fled the camp. Finally being rid of the sadistic girl had brought a smile to his face. Although he didn't care much for the intrigues of nobility, he thought her family would disown her for sure. She'd brought it on her own head, though. For when she asked for that divination and he forbade it, he knew she'd go behind his back. That's why he immediately made that bet with the Vice Magister, and waited. It brought him immense pleasure when his plans came together like this. Although, by fleeing, she'd outdone herself this time. Her desertion, on top of everything else, had been the icing on the cake. Now there was no going back for her, just a slow, excruciating torture by the hands if she was ever caught. His tent flap rustled and a guard saluted as he stepped in.
Sir, a mage was sent to see you. Should I let him in?
Asked the guard. Yes, Beck, please do so, Talius said. The guard quickly exited the tent to do as he was bid. Some scant seconds later, a fat Polari with a very bushy beard entered the tent.
Acolyte Jared Lytle, at your service.
He bowed slightly.
I have been assigned to your unit as the acting mage. I specialize as a hydromancer. in addition to my general occupation.
He finished, pointing out the insignia on his robes.
I am also the second heir to the Lytle family,
he stated proudly. Talia sighed. There was no love lost between him and the nobles. Too bad the Krell didn't have such a caste. It would have made fighting them much easier. Although, from personal experience, some of them were worthy of being called noble. Wait, he remembered something from the report and his eyes lit up. Jarrett took the sight to mean something else entirely, and appeared quite apprehensive. Commander Talius was a legend in the Imperial Command. Offending him was a terrible idea, and after the debacle with his previous counterpart, which was still a hot topic for conversation in the entire encampment, Jarrett really wanted to avoid the same fate.
Have I said something to offend?
he asked, his eyes uncertain. Talius looked distracted. Oh, no, nothing of the sort. I just remembered something important about the latest report. You'll have to excuse me, Talius said as he got up from his seat. It was bad manners, but he couldn't help it. The aristocracy really rubbed him the wrong way.
Of course, I'll take my leave. Please let me know if you require anything,
Jarrett said. Of course. Dismissed, Talius said distractedly. There, he exclaimed as he pointed at a single name. Cover. A name worthy of calling a noble. Ethan's enhanced eyes took no time to recover from the change in light levels as they stepped into the cave. Torches intermittently lined the rocky walls of long passageways leading them deep into the bowels of the mountain. Elder Rowe walked at a brisk pace that Ethan found surprising, considering her apparent age. He glanced at his HUD interface. The three-dimensional map was being updated in real time as they navigated the winding passages. It was somewhat reassuring, knowing that he'd never get lost in this massive natural maze. He noted many strange life forms, too. There were ant-like creatures that scurried about, with glowing bulbous abdomens that changed hues when they came into contact with each other. He assumed it was some method of communication. A large rodent squeaked and bolted into a hole. It was so fast he barely noticed how its body was completely covered in scales. They turned a corner and saw a herd of horse-like beings the size of a man's palm. The horse things were grazing peacefully on the glowing moss. His companions seemed completely unperturbed by the presence of such wonders, while he kept grinning like a fool. He tried to stop and inspect the little horses, but Kotha simply prodded him along. Evolution must have taken very different paths in this world, he thought, as he looked back at the horses and moved along. He resolved to come back and study the creatures at a later date, imagining tiny warriors riding tiny horses and going to battle against gigantic armies. He smiled. It was an amusing thought. Maybe it really did happen in this world. Who knew, right? When he tried to ask about the creatures, he was shushed back into silence. This silent treatment thing was really grating on his nerves. Shortly thereafter, they took a final turn and stepped into a huge, open space. Looking up, he could see a cloudy sky. Snow was slowly falling, only to quickly melt on the warm bowl-shaped floor of this place. We're standing inside a dormant volcano, Ethan realized with shock. The light from the sky shone down to reveal row after row of high tents with people scurrying about as far as the eye could see. There were children playing and singing and chasing each other in groups, while some of the adults tried to control the chaos with benevolent smiles. Apart from the children, everyone wore solemn expressions. Some of the women were even weeping openly, while others tried to console them with whispered words. A massive central bonfire was burning in the middle of the bowl-shaped space. This was the only area free of traffic for some reason, and incidentally, Ethan realized where Elder Rowe was taking them. Before the huge bonfire stood the biggest tent he'd ever seen, with the tribesmen standing guard outside of it. Elder Rowe told Ethan's group to wait, then disappeared inside.
Don't speak unless spoken to. And no matter what you do, don't try to offend her, lest your life be forfeit. With our defeat at the hands of the Empire, she will not be kind and forgiving,
Kotha whispered to Ethan. Ethan swallowed and started sweating profusely, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. He had no idea what to expect, but with Kotha's subtle warning, he was suddenly much less enthusiastic at the chance to meet this matriarch of the Krell tribes. About 10 minutes later, and after much fidgeting on Ethan's part, Elder Rowe exited the tent. She held the tent flap open and beckoned them inside.
Ethan West and Kotha the Brave, you may come forth. The matriarch will see you now.
Shrill grinding sounds could be heard throughout the camp as acolytes practiced their magic. Today's training session was in the School of Geomancy. Although acolyte Jared Leiter was trying to specialize in hydromancy, the magical art of manipulating liquids, he thought that earth magic would have its uses as well. After all, it did complement water magic nicely. This was why he was currently practicing with the rest of the acolytes. An official geomancer was in the process of instructing them on how to best summon and manipulate rocky surfaces to do various tasks. There were many ways of casting spells, and while the Empire predominantly used mind runes, they looked down on other methods of spell casting. For instance, the shamans of the Krell tribes used vocal incantations, while warlocks used symbolism and hieroglyphs and offerings to summon creatures from other planes, and witches performed occult rituals with strange ingredients to do whatever it was witches did. What all methods of casting magic shared was one predominant trait, and that was intent. Even a child could learn how to cast magic if they learned how to focus, direct, and control their intent, but more importantly, how to channel and infuse their intent with mana. Everything else was pure preference and conjecture. In ancient times, people would pray to the gods. When their wishes came true, they called them miracles. What really happened back then, according to the knowledge of today, was that they wanted something so badly that they unconsciously focused their intent and channeled their mana through it, thus casting their own spells. That was the school of thought that Jarrett subscribed to, at least.
Jarrett, you're doing it again.
The instructor seethed.
Sorry.
I swear to the gods, if I catch you daydreaming once more.
The instructor let the threat hang in the air.
No. It won't happen.
Jarrett swallowed and hurriedly assured the teacher.
I bet he wet his robes.
Someone whispered from behind him, and he heard the chuckles of the other acolytes. His face reddened even more, but luckily, he was saved from further humiliation by the arrival of a guard.
Acolyte Jarrett, you're to follow me,
the guard said after talking to the instructor. Jarrett heaved a sigh of relief, and after a nod from the instructor, followed the guard out of the training area.
Is something the matter?
He asked the guard.
The commander wants to see you.
Jarrett followed along, and they arrived at their destination not too long after. Jarrett, come on in, Talia said after lifting his eyes from the big map in the center of the tent.
You wanted to see me?
Jarrett bowed respectfully. Yes. Sorry about interrupting your training session, Talia said absent-mindedly.
It was of no import. How can I be of help?
Jarrett asked, curious. Our scouts have brought reports. Mirza has been captured by the Krell. Jarrett held his breath. What a terrible fate.
Did they torture her before death?
He asked with trepidation, almost afraid of knowing the answer. Oh, no. She is still very much alive. They are currently transporting her deeper into the mountains, said the commander.
Should we save her?
Jarrett asked. She's a deserter. She deserves her fate. The commander was firm. However, they don't know about her predicament. To them, she's still a valuable noble hostage, and a practitioner of the arts. Where do you think they'll be bringing her for interrogation? He asked. Jarrett's eyes widened. Talius held up something shiny. It was a piece of jewelry that jingled in his hand. It's about time we made our move, he said with a mischievous smile. So there will be a divination after all, thought Jarrett with a wry smile. Ethan was apprehensive as he followed Elder Rowe into the tent. It was very warm inside, and hot air wafted out as they went in. It was also darker, but as his eyes adjusted to the lack of light, it didn't take very long. He saw a group of old women deep in conversation. Between them, sitting on a pillow, was a young woman of about 20 years of age. She was very beautiful, but her beauty was marred by a deep frown as she ignored the ongoing debate. He looked around, trying to spot the matriarch, but they all looked the same to him. Then a realization hit him. He immediately turned to face the young woman and half bowed in the same way he had observed people greeting Elder Rowe on their way here. Great matriarch. The debate immediately halted in its tracks, and all eyes fell on Ethan. Elder Rowe looked at Ethan and lifted an eyebrow, then looked deep in thought. The matriarch didn't look surprised at all. Her eyes shone with intellect, and an unspoken challenge. She completely ignored him and turned to Cover. She looked pissed.
Cover, explain yourself,
she commanded in a haughty tone. He went forward and kneeled before her.
Great matriarch. This man, he can use ancient spatial magic.
Cover said quickly.
He comes from another world.
There was a collective gasp from the elders in the tent. Ethan was about to protest, but was immediately silenced by a smack from Elder Rowe, followed by a sharp poke to the side. The matriarch looked quite contemplative.
What do you know of teleportation gates?
She abruptly asked Ethan. Ethan was very hesitant broaching the topic of magic. I I know the scientific part, not the magical part. And to be frank, it was mostly theoretical where I come from, he said very carefully.
So you do know of it. Can you restore an ancient teleportation gate?
She asked with great anticipation. I don't know any magic, sorry, said Ethan regretfully.
So you're useless to me.
She stroked her chin and called for her guards.
Take him to the cells.
Cover looked disappointed. What? Wait. I do have great knowledge you could use. Ethan shouted frantically.
Like what?
She asked impatiently. Like cars and guns. Yeah, guns. Machine guns and sniper rifles and dynamite and landmines. They all looked at him like he was a madman.
We don't want your thingamajigs. Take him away.
Ethan found himself being dragged away as he raved about the industrial revolution he could bring about to anyone within earshot. Aylin Mercer was currently flying. After the old shaman had treated her wounds, they'd taken her off the sled, which had reached its limits after climbing the slippery slopes of the mountains anyway. They were currently surrounded by a bubble of compressed air that the shaman had summoned. It was traveling upwards at a frightening speed, further into the mountains. They didn't untie her bindings, though, which was a shame because she dearly wished to escape. And they kept force-feeding her that vile water that made her spells fizzle out. Every time they fed her that water, she'd curse up a storm, but they only laughed at her predicament. The Krell held no grudges. To them, the men she tortured in their encounter were honorably slain in combat with a worthy foe. They couldn't wish for a better death. Crazy savages, she swore she'd torture all their souls for an eternity, someday. She just needed her chance. Especially that old Jesus shaman. He was the most annoying of them all, and she would make sure he suffered the most. Just the thought of what she'd do to him filled her with glee. After they flew for an indeterminate amount of time, they finally came to a stop and landed in a seemingly random area. The old shaman turned to look at the place and looked satisfied.
This will do nicely,
he commented. He directed his gaze toward his men and gave a single order. Strip her. She whimpered as they took hold of her, and was both terrified and humiliated as they stripped her clothes and ornaments with brisk efficiency. Surprisingly, there were no lecherous looks or extra petting involved. They were very professional about the whole ordeal. The shaman took her belongings and piled them all together. He took out a sharp dagger and pricked her thumb, dripping her blood over the pile. Then he sprinkled some strange powder over it and muttered an incantation. Everything she owned went up in a puff of red flame. She wailed and struggled with the men holding her by the arms. She finally gave up and looked on with tearful eyes. Her pouches had some important items, the soul crystals she'd painstakingly gathered throughout the years, her magical scrolls, and her life's work, her journal. There were decades of meticulous research and some important discoveries in there. The shaman offered her a bearskin cloak, which she quickly donned with a look of contempt. Although it was very warm, it didn't stop her from shivering at all.